India just made history. And I don't mean that super cool space probe on the dark side of the moon, or the fact that they overtook the UK as the fifth largest economy, or even the fact that they have one of the fastest growing economies in the world and a massive demographic dividend. They made history with a relatively small bilateral nuance between themselves and a small country in the Middle East. And this will have massive ramifications for both the economic and political scene. Hello everyone and welcome back to How to Hack the Economy. It's been a while since we spoke, but I've been, busy.
Initially, I was pretty geared to go to the US for my further education, but we kind of made a pivot in the middle of the process, and I'll be now attending Oxford.
Sorry guys. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed faculty members, proud parents and graduates. Today we stand at the precipice of a new chapter of our lives.
Although this economic crisis isn't caused by the lack of money, it's definitely persisting because of the
Sure. So,
I find this take on a dry politics are people like us.
You'll notice a few changes that I don't really want to get into much. The first one is that my lack of activity on YouTube has stopped. I'm back. Hello. And the second is I'm no longer recording from my bedroom as a high schooler, but rather as an economics and management student at Oxford University. Now, this is the bedroom that I recorded in as a high schooler, but that's a technicality and we won't really get into that. I'm just home for the vacations. Regardless, today we're going to talk about the CEPA, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, which came into force on May 2021. This essentially is a trade deal between the United Arab Emirates in the Middle East and India, which reduces tariffs on almost all goods and services, make it easier for sellers to sell between the two countries, and reduces most administrative barriers to trade. These administrative barriers like packaging requirements, environmental standards, and other regulatory barriers are a huge problem when it comes to trading between two vastly different economies. So this is a huge win for free trade beyond just the reduction in tariffs. This is pretty basic, not gonna lie, and first reading this, I wasn't so overwhelmed with what it was telling me. But just a year and a half later, this happened. And this was followed by this. Now, I'm gonna get into why this is super important soon, but essentially, this small trade deal, consisting of less than 1.5% of India's GDP, will lead to a changing world order and a toppling of the US dollar as the global reserve currency, thus reducing the United States' political and economical power. Again, we will get into this later and in due course, but first, let's talk about what this trade deal means for India. So let's talk about trade between these two countries. Now, the UAE is not known as a massive oil producer. In fact, it only accounts for 5.9% of total oil production. But nonetheless, it still supplies oil to a large part of the world and is a big voice in OPEC conferences. Nonetheless, India's rapidly industrializing and growing economy needed a source of energy, and they turned to the UAE amongst other countries to purchase their oil. And the UAE was happy to supply this, and this exchange happened in rupees. This was the only oil deal since Bretton Woods that happened in rupees. Now, this is super important, and I'm going to get into why later, but this is also really helpful to set the stage and the context for what I'm about to discuss. And when we put all this together, we will understand how this relates to a changing world order. So, India gets a reliable source of oil. Cool. But there was a further liberalization of trade between these two countries. In fact, the value of non-oil exchanges between these two countries was $50 billion, which accounts for 10% of the UAE's GDP and is another market for Indian goods to reach. And by liberalization, I mean the UAE dropped 99% of all tariffs on Indian goods. Trade does not get any freer than that. This also brings India to the world stage on the front of trade. With many companies moving their production centers to India from China, there's an increase in production within India, such as consumer electronics. So Let's look at why this shift happened. For starters, companies like Apple, Microsoft, Dell, and Nike are some of the companies that have moved their production to India instead of China. And the reason is simple: stability. The US and China have been through several trade wars. There is growing political instability within Hong Kong and Taiwan, and there is increasing political animosity between India and China as well. India, on the flip side, is a completely different story. They have a no strike first policy. They trade and have good relations with every major market in the world, going beyond political alignment and trading with the likes of the US and Russia at the same time, for example. And they have a large enough political presence where they can engage with a large and diverse group of economic partners. And India has labor. Lots and lots of labor. So these large conglomerates want a slice of the Indian pie, making India a new trade hub for the world where these companies manufacture in India and then ship these goods off to wherever they are consumed. And this is simply because India has a better climate, both politically and economically, for them to do so. Also, India isn't just a hub for established companies to move in. India also churns out unicorns and is the country that has the third most unicorns in the world. A unicorn isn't a mythical, mystical flying stallion in this case, but a business that is worth more than $1 billion. For context, the first unicorn in India didn't appear until 2011. So from being the country that 10 years ago just had one unicorn to having the third most in the world is nothing short of incredible. Essentially, the immense growth in output from India provides dividends to consumption in the UAE and is also a way to provide sustainable growth for India. Furthermore, India was one of the few countries that did not levy sanctions on Russia as a result of the Ukraine war. As the foreign minister of India once said, Europe has to grow out of the mindset that Europe's problems are the world's problems, but the world's problems aren't Europe's problems. Now, the political implications of this far outweigh the scope of the video, and I don't want to get into the political and moral meat of this issue because for this topic, it's frankly irrelevant. But as a purely normative statement, this allowed India to keep the lights on year-round at a cheaper rate. For example, inflation in India during its peak rates in 2022 was around 6%, whereas the rest of the world had an inflation rate of around 8.3%. This means that the inflation rate in India was 27% less than the rest of the world. Put simply, this just means that on average, India had goods that are 27% cheaper than the rest of the world. So, India has cheaper products due to lower wages, production centers that have been moved from China, an increase in the growth of unicorns, which increase production possibilities, lower inflation, so even cheaper products, and unfiltered access to the market in the UAE. So in purely trade terms, this is the perfect storm to allow India to increase its rapid growth and increase its standard of living. All of these combined provide India the political and economic power required to push itself up further on the world stage. Now, the second part is slightly different from trade. It is the first foreign investment in the slightly contested part of India, Kashmir. And Kashmir is absolutely beautiful. It has scenic wildlife, amazing weather, and ski slopes that are just incredible. However, foreign investment wasn't allowed in Kashmir up until Article 370 was revoked in 2019. Article 370 basically granted Jammu and Kashmir the ability to have its own constitution and, amongst other things, prevented investment in Kashmir unless the parties involved were from Kashmir. Now, this is a very controversial issue, and I don't want to get into whether or not the revocation of this article provided a net benefit to India and its people or Kashmir and its people, but one benefit did come out of it. The UAE, as a follow-on to CEPA, agreed to begin massive investment projects in Jammu and Kashmir. The UAE became the first foreign investor in Kashmir since the revocation of the article, with an investment of over 5 billion Indian rupees or $60.5 million by Emaar. And Emaar is basically UAE's government-owned construction company that is a big name domestically and abroad. This will not only increase the economic growth rate of Jammu and Kashmir through the multiplier effect, but due to the nature of the investment, which is constructing a shopping and office complex, Jammu and Kashmir will now have the tourist infrastructure it needs to attract visitors to the natural wildlife and beauty of the area. This brings up an important point: primary and secondary tourist resources. Primary resources are those that weren't made or didn't exist for the purpose of tourism, such as beautiful mountains, wildlife, and rivers, all of which Kashmir has. Secondary resources, on the other hand, are those that are made to sustain tourism or boost it to begin with in the first place. These include shopping complexes, hotels, and more. Now, as a destination, one can earn decent chunks of money with just primary resources or just secondary resources. With both, however, a destination becomes the destination, and that's what Kashmir looks like it's going to do. I mean, let's look at the statistics for a second. Billions of dollars are being brought into Kashmir as a result of tourism, and that too without the finished investment project from the UAE. Bring in the guru of tourism, the UAE, which boasts the best tourist attractions in the world, to supplement Kashmir's already rich primary resources with secondary resources. You got a force of tourism that will do wonders for India's economy. And tourism does things that the trade of tangible goods just can't do. Firstly, it is not subject to any tariffs, aside from South Africa, which has a tax rate of 1% on the tourist industry. But again, in the case of India, this doesn't exist. It's also a service economy, which means it adds more value than just the export of primary goods or even manufactured goods like consumer electronics. It also leads to the creation of more infrastructure. If tourists swarm to India after the secondary tourist resources have been finished, India will more or less be forced to create more secondary resources, which tourism will provide the money for. It also provides jobs. Now, while the trade of tangible goods does provide an increase or a boost in employment, it does so in a very narrow and specific sector. Think about the steel industry, for example. If steel exports increase, then yes, you will have more employment in the steel sector, but only in the steel sector and probably just for its production as well. Think about the whole journey for a second when you visit some other country. First, you'll have to pay for your flight out to that country, and typically the cheapest airlines are the ones from the destination country. So in the case of India, it will be Air India. So you'll be paying Air India to take you to India. Once you're in India, you're going to have to pay for a cab to take you to your hotel. You're going to have to pay the hotel for you to stay there. You're going to have to pay for the primary and secondary tourist resources that you are visiting. You're going to have to pay for the cab back, and then again, you fly out. That is direct employment in a lot of sectors. And this is coming at a perfect time with the growing resurgence of tourism. I have labored quite a bit on what is just a small part of the trade deal, but it is these nuances, such as the growth in global tourism, the expertise involved in the creation of these secondary tourist resources, where the primary tourist resources are based, and the advantages that India can glean from the very nature of tourism that makes this deal so incredibly beneficial for India. The UAE also stands to benefit from this investment. India has become one of the fastest growing economies in the world, partly thanks to the increase in investment and the economic policies pursued, but also due to the demographic dividend. With a growth rate of 6.9%, UAE's large and sole investment in Jammu and Kashmir will have massive returns, bolstering the country's foreign exchange reserves, as well as providing an additional revenue stream for the government to inject in their plans for national growth. So with CEPA, the old adage that big things come in small packages is really quite appropriate, or don't judge a book by its cover, or any one of those facetious quotes that sound really cool but are really just saying the same thing. Now, cheesy sayings aside, it is clear that this trade deal has massive benefits for India. To recap, these are an increase in trade and the benefits that come with it, foreign investment in a place that's never received it, and the gains from tourism. Now that we've analyzed the political and economic advantages that India seeks to enjoy from this angle, I will tie in what I spoke about just now to look at the big overall idea over the course of the next few videos: changing world order. In the meantime, drop a comment in the box below to let me know what you'd like to hear me discuss next time. I've got some amazing things in the pipeline and would love to hear from you on what topics you'd like me to dish some analysis out on. With that being said, it would be awesome if you could hit the like and subscribe button. Until next time.